Marcus Green, a black software engineer, walked into the interview room with a portfolio that could have changed his life. But before he could speak, the manager slid his resume back across the table, without reading a single line. "Sorry," the man muttered. "We're looking for someone who'll fit the culture." The room went silent. Marcus noticed the receptionist's shocked face, the hidden phone recording, and the truth about to explode. But would anyone believe him before his career was destroyed? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Jamison Carter had worked at Briarwood University for nearly 12 years. He knew every creaking door, every flickering light in the corridors, and every scuffed tile in the lecture halls. He knew which classroom desks had been carved with initials by restless undergraduates, and which professors left their coffee stains on the podiums. He was part of the fabric of the campus, and yet he wasn't seen. Not truly. Students walked by him, as if he were just another piece of furniture. Professors gave him polite nods when absolutely necessary, their eyes sliding away before they could risk conversation. Jamison wore the same navy blue janitorial uniform every day, and to most of them, that was all he was. A man with a mop bucket. A man with no voice. But inside, Jamison Carter carried a world no one had ever asked about. Every night after finishing his shift, when the classrooms were empty and the chatter of the campus had died down, he lingered. He walked past the chalkboards filled with equations, formulas, and half-erased scrawls left behind by professors. Where others saw a mess of numbers, Jamison saw patterns. Where others saw symbols scattered in chaos, Jamison felt a rhythm, a logic that pulled him in. He had once dreamed of being on the other side of the desk, long before life had carved him into someone practical. Before bills and bias forced him into janitorial work, Jamison had been a boy who solved puzzles faster than his teachers could assign them. He had grown up with a mother who worked double shifts at a diner, and a father who believed his son would be the first in the family to earn a PhD. But life didn't bend for them. When his father passed and scholarships dried up, Jamison's ambitions collided with survival. And survival won. Now, at 42, he was still solving puzzles, only this time he carried them in his head as he pushed a broom down polished marble hallways. That night, the halls were silent. A storm had brushed through the town earlier, rattling the trees outside, but the campus was calm again. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above him as he wheeled his mop bucket toward Lecture Hall B, one of the largest rooms in the mathematics building. Inside, the air smelled faintly of chalk dust and old paper. Dozens of chairs sat empty, their rows like abandoned steps in an auditorium. The board stretched across the front wall, littered with half-finished equations from that day's advanced mathematics class. Jamison froze. His eyes lingered on one particular equation that spanned nearly half the board. The scrawls were jagged, hurried, as if the professor had been trying to work something out but had stopped midstream. To most, it was a wall of confusion. To Jamison, it was a challenge. He stood in the doorway longer than he should have. He could hear the little voice in his head, the one that reminded him of his place. "You're just the janitor. Don't touch it. Don't get caught pretending to be what they'll never let you be." But another voice, quieter, stronger, pushed back. Just one line. Just one correction. Jamison's hand twitched toward the chalk tray. He set down his mop handle carefully, like a man laying down a weapon. He glanced at the door, empty. The halls were still silent. He reached for a piece of chalk. The weight of it between his fingers felt oddly heavy, as if carrying not just dust but history. He pressed it to the board, and the squeak rang out in the stillness. Line after line, symbol after symbol, Jamison moved with certainty. His handwriting was neat, precise, far cleaner than the rushed scrawls of the professor who had left it. For him, numbers had always been more than numbers. They were music, rhythm, an invisible thread connecting everything. Each step he took wasn't guesswork. It was instinct honed over decades of private study in notebooks that no one had ever read. While others saw barriers, Jamison saw openings. While others dismissed him, he built worlds no one cared to ask about. As the solution began to take shape, he felt his chest tighten. Not from fear, but from something that had long been buried: pride. It was the kind of pride he had not felt since he was a boy solving math riddles on the back of grocery receipts, watching his teachers marvel until they realized who he was. The chalk dust coated his fingertips, leaving white smudges on his dark skin, and he didn't care. He was lost in the equation, lost in the symphony of it. as if time itself had slowed. The storm outside had ended, but inside, lightning cracked with every line he drew. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. By the time Jameson stepped back, the board was transformed. The tangled web of confusion had become a clear path. The unsolvable had been solved. Jameson breathed out, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. He wiped his forehead with the back of his sleeve, leaving a streak of chalk across his temple. For a fleeting moment, the room didn't feel empty. It felt like an audience of 1,000,000 eyes could have been watching, and he would have been ready to explain, to prove, to show that brilliance could come from anyone, anywhere, even from the man who carried a mop. But then reality sank back in. The silence reminded him that this moment wasn't for applause. This wasn't his classroom. This wasn't his stage. He was just a janitor standing in a room he wasn't supposed to claim. He reached for the eraser, his fingers trembling, ready to wipe away the evidence before anyone could see, before anyone could remind him of his place. But just as the chalk squeaked its final line across the board, Jameson froze. The sound of a shoe scuffing against the tile echoed faintly behind him. His heart dropped. Slowly, he turned his head toward the doorway. There, standing in the dim glow of the hallway light, was a figure, a man, watching him. Jameson's breath caught in his throat. The chalk slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a soft tap that sounded louder than thunder in the silence. The pair of eyes at the door were fixed on him, unblinking, unreadable. And in that moment, Jameson knew he hadn't been as invisible as he thought. The chalk squeaked as Jameson finished an equation no professor had dared to touch, and a pair of eyes watched from the doorway. Jameson's hand hovered uselessly over the eraser, his pulse drumming so loudly in his ears that he almost didn't hear the footsteps enter the room. The figure from the doorway stepped closer, revealing himself under the weak fluorescent light. It was Richard Lawson, the senior mathematics professor at Briarwood. Jameson's breath caught. He knew Lawson by reputation. Everyone did. Lawson was a man whose voice carried more weight than the dean's. A man who prided himself on mentoring doctoral candidates yet barely acknowledged the existence of custodial staff. To students, he was intimidating. To colleagues, he was respected. To Jameson, he was untouchable. And now Lawson was staring at the chalkboard as though it had betrayed him. Jameson's chest tightened. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to say he hadn't meant to intrude, but the words tangled in his throat. He knew how this looked. A janitor caught scribbling nonsense on an elite university's board. No matter how neat the proof was, the first assumption wouldn't be brilliance. It would be arrogance. Lawson's gaze flicked from the chalkboard to Jameson's chalk-streaked hands. His lips pressed into a thin line, and Jameson felt the weight of that silence more than any insult. Who? Lawson's voice was measured, clipped, each word precise. Who taught you that formula? The question sliced through the still air. Jameson swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. He opened his mouth, but his voice faltered. I've studied, sir. On my own. Lawson blinked once, as if the response had confirmed his lowest expectation. His eyes hardened, not with curiosity, but with suspicion. On your own, he repeated, the words tasting like disbelief. Jameson felt the sting, not because Lawson had doubted him, but because it was the same disbelief he had lived under for decades. Behind every smirk, every dismissive nod, every muttered janitor, there was an assumption that his black skin confined him to labor, not learning, that his hands were meant to scrub floors, not trace theories across a chalkboard. I didn't mean any harm, Jameson said quietly, his tone apologetic though he hadn't done anything wrong. His voice was careful, too careful. He had learned long ago how easily black men could be misinterpreted as confrontational. I was just finishing what was already there. Lawson stepped closer, his shoes clicking against the tile. He studied the board again, his brows furrowed. The problem had been complex, an advanced theorem that Lawson himself had been working on for weeks. And yet here it was, neatly tied together in logical steps. For a flicker of a moment, Lawson's eyes betrayed something unexpected, recognition. He knew the solution was correct. He knew the man in front of him had just solved something real. But instead of admiration, Lawson's expression hardened further. This isn't your work. You couldn't have derived this. The words stung like open wounds, though Jameson had braced for them. I swear I didn't copy, Jameson whispered. His eyes dropped to the floor. I've been working on problems like this for years. The silence stretched, suffocating. Jameson felt his dignity shrink in the professor's shadow. He had lived his whole life carrying brilliance inside him, hidden like contraband, too dangerous to review. He kept notebooks at home, hundreds of pages filled with calculations, patterns, proofs he had crafted over late nights after cleaning shifts. He kept them secret not because he was ashamed, but because he knew what the world would say. A janitor solving equations. Impossible. He thought about every sideways glance he endured, while pushing his mop bucket through crowded hallways. Students who spoke around him as if he were deaf, professors who never said his name, strangers who assumed his role told them everything they needed to know. The truth was heavier than the mop he carried. The stereotypes suffocated him. His brilliance had no outlet, no audience, only chalkboards in abandoned classrooms when no one was watching. But tonight, someone had watched. And it was the worst possible someone. Lawson's jaw tightened. He folded his arms. You'll need to clean this up. Now. Jameson's heart sank. Not only had Lawson dismissed the work, he had reduced it to vandalism.
I didn't mean to.
Erase it. Lawson cut him off, his voice colder now. This is a classroom, not a playground. Jameson wanted to fight back, to point to the proof, to demand acknowledgement. But the words withered before they reached his lips. He thought of his daughter, Maya, waiting at home. He thought of the fragile balance of his life, steady paychecks, health benefits, the security of a job that kept food on the table. All of it could be ripped away with a single accusation of insubordination. So he reached for the eraser. Each stroke across the chalkboard felt like erasing a part of himself. He had poured himself into those lines, into that solution, and now they vanished under his own hand. The board returned to emptiness, just as Jameson returned to invisibility. But Lawson didn't leave. He watched, arms folded, eyes sharp. His silence was a verdict. When Jameson finally set the eraser down, Lawson stepped closer, lowering his voice. Stay in your lane, Carter. The words struck deeper than any insult. Lawson hadn't just questioned the math. He had reminded Jameson of the invisible cage around him, one built of centuries of assumptions, enforced with a tone that left no room for rebuttal. Jameson nodded stiffly. He picked up his mop handle again, his hands trembling, his pride in tatters. Lawson lingered for another moment before finally turning toward the door. As he reached the threshold, he paused, glancing back at Jameson. His eyes narrowed, not with curiosity, but with calculation, like a man already considering what to do with the memory of what he had seen. Then he left. The silence returned, but it was heavier now. Jameson stood frozen, the mop handle clutched in his hand, staring at the empty chalkboard as though it mocked him. His shoulders sagged, his head lowered, and yet, deep inside, a spark still burned. He had solved it. That was undeniable, even if Lawson refused to admit it. No amount of dismissal could erase the truth that, for 1 hour, Jameson Carter had proven himself. Still, the cost weighed on him. That moment of pride had been crushed under stereotypes that clung to him like chains. Chains he had been dragging for decades. He left the classroom slowly, pushing his mop bucket down the hall, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The storm outside had cleared, but inside Jameson, the storm had only begun. As he turned the corner, he heard footsteps again. Soft, measured, but deliberate. He glanced back. Lawson stood at the far end of the hallway, phone in hand, speaking into it. His voice was low, but Jameson caught fragments caught him at the board. Janitor needs to be watched. Jameson's stomach knotted. Lawson wasn't just dismissing him. He was reporting him. Jameson turned quickly, forcing his legs to carry him out of the building. His heart pounded, not from guilt, but from fear of what would come next. He had tried so hard to stay invisible, to avoid the scrutiny that came with stepping beyond the lines drawn for him. Tonight, that invisibility had been shattered. By the time he stepped into the cool night air, his breath came heavy. He walked faster, gripping the mop handle like a lifeline. He knew what tomorrow would bring. Whispers, rumors, perhaps worse. Lawson had seen not just equations, he had seen Jameson daring to exist outside his assigned role. For Jameson Carter, that was the greatest threat of all. And then as he reached the parking lot, his phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from an unknown number. It read, "I saw what you did. Don't let him bury you." Jameson froze, staring at the glowing screen, the words burning into his mind. Someone else had seen. The professor's voice cut through the silence. "Who taught you that formula?" Dr. Richard Lawson had built his reputation on being the man with answers. For 20 years, his lectures were filled with complex proofs that drew in ambitious graduate students from across the country. His name carried weight in academic circles. His theories were cited, his research papers well-funded. He prided himself on being a gatekeeper of knowledge, and in his mind, those who passed through his classroom either rose to brilliance or were discarded into mediocrity. But tonight, what he had witnessed unsettled him. Lawson replayed the moment over and over in his mind. The janitor, Jameson Carter, standing at the chalkboard with chalk-dusted hands, calmly finishing a proof Lawson himself had been struggling with. The lines of logic had been flawless, the conclusion airtight, yet instead of admiration, Lawson had felt something colder coil in his gut. Doubt. Not doubt in the mathematics. He knew the solution was correct. Doubt in the man who had written it. Jameson Carter wasn't supposed to be capable of this. He wasn't a doctoral student, wasn't a faculty member, wasn't even enrolled in a class. He was a janitor, a black janitor at that. And Lawson's mind, shaped by years of prejudice he never questioned, rejected the idea before it had room to breathe. If Jameson had been a student, Lawson might have praised him begrudgingly, but still praised him. If he had been a visiting researcher, Lawson might have invited discussion. But a janitor? No. That wasn't brilliance. That was suspicion. Lawson's thoughts sharpened into something accusatory. He must have copied it. He must have seen it somewhere. He must have memorized a solution and pretended to know. The narrative felt safer, cleaner, easier to digest. It wasn't possible that someone like Jameson Carter had solved what Lawson had not. As Jameson erased the last remnants of chalk from the board, Lawson's eyes never left him. The janitor's movements were humble, deferential, as if trying not to provoke him. That humility only stoked Lawson's unease. He saw submission where he expected arrogance. He saw fear, and it told him one thing: guilt. Who taught you that formula? Lawson had asked, his tone colder than the air between them. And Jameson's answer: I studied on my own, only deepened the professor's suspicion. It was absurd. Men like Lawson spent decades in academia, mastering these theories, with access to libraries, mentors, and symposiums. The idea that a man who scrubbed floors for a living could learn them in isolation struck him as insulting. Lawson told himself it wasn't about race. He was too polished to admit that prejudice played a role. He dressed it up as academic rigor, as skepticism, as standards, but beneath the layers the truth hummed. He couldn't reconcile brilliance with the man in front of him, and so suspicion began to grow. By the next morning, whispers had already spread. Lawson, in quiet conversation with a fellow professor, let the story slip in a tone laced with amusement. Caught the janitor writing formulas on the board last night, he said casually over coffee in the faculty lounge. Claims he figured it out himself. His colleague chuckled. What, some genius hiding in plain sight? Hardly. Lawson smirked. More like a man who got his hands on the wrong textbook. The joke landed, but the seed was planted. Soon murmurs drifted through hallways. The janitor was pretending to be a mathematician. Jameson, unaware of how far the story had traveled, moved through his day as he always did. Head down, mop in hand, careful not to intrude, but he felt it in the way students glanced at him a little longer, in the way two professors paused their conversation as he entered a room, in the quiet snickers that followed him out of earshot. Invisible, yet exposed. Later that evening, Jameson returned to the same lecture hall. Part of him wanted to avoid it, to stay clear of chalkboards altogether. But the pull was irresistible. Solving equations had always been his refuge. Numbers never lied to him. They didn't care about skin color, or job titles, or paychecks. In mathematics he was free. So he entered quietly, his mop bucket rolling behind him, and let his eyes trace the fresh equations left behind by Lawson's students earlier that day. His fingers twitched toward the chalk again, but a memory of Lawson's glare stopped him cold. Stay in your lane, Carter. The words echoed in his mind, heavy as chains. And yet as he stood there frozen, a voice from the back of the room startled him. You're really not supposed to be doing that, you know. Jameson spun around, heart hammering. A young man sat in the back row, a laptop balanced on his knees. He was one of Lawson's graduate assistants, Ethan Morris, a sharp but arrogant student, whose smirk carried more disdain than curiosity. I didn't mean, Jameson began. Ethan closed his laptop slowly, rising from his seat. Don't bother explaining. I know what this is. Jameson frowned. What is? Ethan's smirk widened, You're trying to play smart, trying to pretend you belong here. He walked down the aisle of seats with deliberate steps. But you don't. You clean our trash. That's your role. Don't confuse yourself. The words stung, sharper than Lawson's, because they carried the rawness of youth, the confidence of someone who had never been forced to question his place.
I'm not pretending, Jameson said quietly. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the hurt. I study, on my own.
Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You expect me to believe that? Please. Do you know how many people would kill to solve that theorem? And you, a janitor, claim you figured it out between sweeping hallways? He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. You should be careful. People don't like imposters. Jameson's throat tightened. The warning wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder. His presence at the board, his attempt to reach beyond his assigned role, wasn't just unwelcome. It was dangerous. Ethan left the hall without another word, his laughter echoing off the walls. Jameson stood alone, staring at the chalkboard. For the first time in years, the comfort of equations felt poisoned. Every line he wanted to draw now felt like evidence that could be used against him. And deep down, he knew Ethan wasn't finished. Later that night, as Lawson sat in his office grading papers, his phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Saw Carter at the board again. He says he studies on his own. Thought you'd want to know. Lawson's eyes narrowed. His suspicion hardened into intent. This wasn't harmless curiosity anymore. In his mind, this was a janitor stepping out of line, challenging the order Lawson had built his life around. He wouldn't let that stand. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as his fingers tapped against the desk. Not on my watch, he muttered under his breath. The decision formed in his mind with chilling clarity. He wouldn't confront Jameson with praise. He wouldn't offer guidance. He would crush this before it spread. And so when Jameson entered the mathematics building the next day for his evening shift, the atmosphere was already different. Conversations hushed when he walked by. Laughter followed him like shadows. Students leaned against lockers, smirking, their eyes daring him to step near another board. The story had spread too far, twisted into mockery. Jameson kept his head down, but his shoulders were heavy, his steps slower. Every whisper confirmed what he feared. Lawson's silence had become a verdict. And that night, as Jameson returned once again to clean Lecture Hall B, he found Lawson waiting inside. The professor stood by the chalkboard, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Jameson froze at the doorway. Lawson's voice was calm, almost too calm. I think it's time we cleared something up. Jameson stepped in slowly, pushing his mop bucket forward. Sir, I didn't mean any disrespect. Lawson raised a hand, cutting him off. Don't explain. Actions speak louder than words. And your actions tell me everything I need to know. Jameson's brow furrowed. I was just solving problems. That's all. Lawson's lips curved into a thin smile that carried no warmth. You see, Carter, when a man like you shows up in a place like this, doing things beyond his station, people start asking questions. He paused, letting the words sink in. Dangerous questions. Jameson's stomach nodded. I'm not trying to cause trouble. Trouble finds those who don't know their place, Lawson replied smoothly. The silence between them grew heavy. Then, without breaking eye contact, Lawson reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. Jameson's breath hitched, his chest tight. Lawson's voice was steady, almost casual. Perhaps security can help remind you where that place is. Instead of praise, Lawson reached for the phone to call security. Lawson's thumb tapped against the phone screen, deliberate and unhurried, as if savoring the weight of the decision. Jameson stood frozen in the lecture hall, mop handle still in his grip like a staff he didn't know how to use. His heart thudded in his chest, but his voice when it came was steady. Sir, please. There's no need for this. Lawson didn't look up. I disagree.
The call connected. A brief exchange followed, curt and professional. Jameson caught fragments, unauthorized use, acting suspiciously. Come quickly.
And then it was done. The silence between them deepened, heavy as stone. Jameson wanted to argue, to plead his case, to shout that the chalkboard told the truth Lawson refused to see. But his instincts screamed louder. Don't raise your voice. Don't make sudden moves. Don't give them a reason to escalate. When the door finally opened, the sound of boots against tile echoed like thunder. 2 campus security officers entered, both white, both broad-shouldered, their radios crackling faintly. Their eyes went straight to Jameson. What seems to be the problem here? One of them asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Lawson gestured toward the chalkboard, now empty except for faint smudges of eraser marks. I found this man tampering with academic material, writing on the board, refusing to explain himself. He's not authorized to be here after hours in this capacity. Jameson's mouth went dry. I work here, he said, voice quiet but firm. I'm the janitor for this building. The taller officer's eyes flicked to the mop bucket at Jameson's side, then back to Lawson. That true? Lawson gave a small shrug. Perhaps, but his behavior tonight raises concerns. I think it's best you escort him out. He doesn't belong in here. Those last words, he doesn't belong in here, cut deeper than Jameson wanted to admit. The officers approached. One gestured toward the door. Let's go, sir. Jameson tightened his grip on the mop handle. Not in defiance, but in desperation. This was all he had, the proof of his place, his work, his reason for being there. I wasn't hurting anyone, he said, voice trembling but controlled. I was cleaning. Then he stopped himself. What could he say? That he'd been solving equations, that he'd finished a proof Lawson couldn't complete. The thought of speaking it aloud felt laughable. No one would believe him. They'd only hear arrogance, delusion. The shorter officer sighed, his patience already thin. Sir, we don't need trouble. Let's walk. Jameson lowered his eyes. The fight drained from him. Slowly, he released the mop handle and raised his hands slightly, palms open, as if to prove he carried nothing dangerous but the skin they already judged him for. He stepped forward. The officers flanked him, one at each side, guiding him toward the door. As they moved into the hallway, the sound hit him first. Whispers. Students were gathering, drawn by curiosity. A janitor escorted by security wasn't common, and their eyes lit with fascination, amusement, pity. Jameson heard the murmurs ripple through the crowd. What'd he do? Caught stealing? No. I heard he was messing with the chalkboards. Seriously, that's hilarious. Laughter bubbled at the edges. It wasn't loud, but it cut sharper than any shout. Jameson's face burned. His wrists weren't cuffed, but humiliation wrapped around him tighter than steel. To them, he wasn't a man with a story, with years of self-taught brilliance. He wasn't someone who'd solved what others had failed. He was just a black janitor being walked out like a thief. The officers guided him through the main atrium, past a group of undergraduates huddled near the vending machines. One of them lifted his phone, the faint red light of a recording blinking, as he angled for a clear shot. Jameson's chest tightened. He wanted to shield his face, but lifting his hands would only draw suspicion. He kept walking, chin low, eyes fixed on the ground. Every step echoed in his ears like a drumbeat of shame. Behind them, Lawson stood in the doorway of the lecture hall, watching. His arms were folded, his expression unreadable, but there was no mistaking the slight curve of satisfaction in his lips. For Lawson, the message had been delivered. Jameson Carter had crossed a line, and this was the consequence. By the time they reached the security office, Jameson's silence was suffocating. The officers filled out a brief incident report, barely glancing at him as they wrote. One finally spoke. You're free to go, but stay out of the classrooms after hours, unless you're cleaning. Understood? Jameson nodded stiffly. Yes. They dismissed him like a misbehaving student, and he walked out into the night air, the cool breeze hitting his face like a reminder that freedom wasn't the same as dignity. The campus stretched around him, lights glowing in windows where students studied, laughed, planned futures that the world encouraged them to chase. Futures he had once dreamed of, before the weight of stereotypes pinned him down. He reached his car in the far lot, his steps heavy, his shoulders slumped. When he closed the door behind him, the silence inside the vehicle was unbearable. His reflection in the rearview mirror looked back at him, chalk still faint on his temple, shame still etched in his eyes. For a long time he didn't start the engine. He sat there, hands gripping the wheel, fighting the urge to scream. He thought of his notebooks at home, filled with proofs and patterns. He thought of how close he'd come to feeling seen, only for it to be ripped away in front of strangers. When he finally pulled out of the lot, the whispers of the crowd followed him into the darkness, haunting him. At home, the light in the living room was still on. Through the window, Jameson saw Maya waiting on the couch, her textbook spread out around her. She looked up when he walked in, her face lighting with relief before it faltered at the sight of him. Daddy, what happened? She asked softly. Jameson forced a smile, but his voice cracked. Nothing, baby. Just a long night. Maya tilted her head. I saw something online. Jameson's stomach dropped. What do you mean? She reached for her phone and held it out. On the screen was a short video clip. Grainy, shaky, but unmistakable. Him, walking between two security guards. Head down, mop bucket abandoned behind him. The caption read, "Janitor thought he was Einstein. Guess not." Jameson's throat closed. His daughter's eyes searched his face, wide with confusion and hurt. They were laughing. Daddy, she whispered. Why were they laughing? Why did they say you were pretending? You're smart. You've always been smart. Her words cut deeper than any insult that night. For Jameson, humiliation was a familiar burden. But for his daughter to see him reduced like this, for her to question why the world mocked his mind, it was unbearable. He sank onto the couch beside her, struggling to find words. His hands shook as he tried to explain, but nothing he said could mask the truth. The world didn't laugh because he was wrong. The world laughed because he had dared to be right in a place that told him he had no right. And now his daughter had seen it. She leaned against him, her small voice trembling. Daddy, why do people laugh when you try to be smart? Jameson closed his eyes, his chest tight with a grief too heavy for words. That night, Jameson's daughter asked him why people laughed when her daddy tried to be smart. The silence after Maya's question was heavier than anything Jameson had endured that night. Her small voice echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. Daddy, why do people laugh when you try to be smart? Jameson had no answer that wouldn't wound her further. He could tell her the truth that people laughed because they had already decided who he was supposed to be, and brilliance wasn't part of that story. Or he could tell her a lie that it didn't matter, that the world would come around if he just kept working quietly. Both felt like betrayals. So he sat with her in the stillness, his arm around her shoulder, her head leaning against his chest. He could feel the weight of her trust in him, the way she believed in a version of her father that the world refused to see. Maya, he whispered finally, his voice cracking. Sometimes people laugh because they don't understand. Sometimes they laugh because it's easier than facing the truth. She tilted her head up, her eyes searching his face. But you are smart. I've seen your notebooks. You always say numbers can't lie. Jameson managed a weak smile. That's true. Numbers don't lie. Maya straightened, her young face hardening with a seriousness beyond her years. Then you can't stop. You can't let them erase you. Her words pierced him. At 12 years old, she was already learning the cruel divide between how the world saw her father and how she did. And instead of shrinking from it, she leaned in with defiance. That night, while Jameson tried to retreat into silence, Maya insisted on pulling his notebooks from the shelf. She spread them across the coffee table, dozens of worn journals, their pages filled with careful handwriting, complex equations, annotations, and sketches of proofs. To her, they weren't just scribbles, they were evidence, testimony to a brilliance hidden too long. Daddy, she said, flipping through one notebook. This looks like what my teacher showed us last week. But harder, way harder. Jameson chuckled softly, though it carried no joy. That's because I've been working on these for years, little by little, whenever I could. Maya looked up at him with wide eyes. Then why don't you show people? He sighed. Because sometimes, it doesn't matter what you show. Some people already decided what they'll see. Her brow furrowed. Like Mr. Lawson? Jameson froze at the mention of Lawson's name. His daughter had seen the video, read the comments. She knew more than he wanted her to. Slowly, he nodded. Yes, like Mr. Lawson. Maya's eyes narrowed. Then prove him wrong. Jameson laughed quietly, a humorless sound. It's not that simple, baby girl. Men like him, they don't change their minds. No matter what I solve, he'll find a reason to say it doesn't count. But Maya wasn't convinced. She leaned closer, her voice low, urgent. Then show other people. Show the ones who will listen. The determination in her eyes unsettled him. She wasn't just asking him to fight for himself. She was begging him to fight for the version of her father she refused to let the world steal. The next morning, Jameson rose early, unable to sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside him, flipping through one of his notebooks. Maya's words echoed in his head. Prove him wrong. Show the ones who will listen. But who would listen? By the time he arrived at work, the whispers had only grown. Students eyed him with mockery thinly disguised as curiosity. There goes Einstein, one muttered as he passed. Another laughed. Don't forget your chalk, professor. Jameson forced himself not to react, but each comment carved deeper into his resolve. He moved through the halls like a ghost carrying invisible wounds, his mop squeaking across the tiles as though punctuating every insult. That evening, as he walked past the bulletin boards in the main lobby, a flyer caught his eye. Briarwood Mathematics Annual Challenge, open to all, competitors welcome. His steps faltered. The words burned into him. He had walked past that flyer dozens of times before, never giving it more than a glance. The competition was a tradition at Briarwood, a chance for students and scholars to prove their skill before faculty judges. Winners often went on to publish, to secure scholarships, to build reputations. Open to all. The phrase echoed in his mind like a dare. But even as the thought stirred something inside him, Jameson shook his head and kept walking. It wasn't for him. Even if he entered, no one would take him seriously. They'd laugh him out of the room before he even touched the chalk. Still, that night at home, Maya noticed the shift in his expression as he ate dinner. He was quieter than usual, his eyes distant. "What happened today?" she asked. Jameson hesitated, then admitted, "I saw something at work, a math competition, open to everyone." Maya's fork clattered against her plate. "A competition? Like, with real prizes?" He nodded slowly. "Scholarships. Recognition. But it's not for me." "Why not?" she demanded. Jameson sighed, rubbing his temples. "Because people like me don't get invited to the table, Maya. They say open to all, but they don't mean it. They mean open to all who already belong." Her eyes narrowed, fire sparking within them.
"Then make them mean it."
Jameson chuckled weakly. "Baby, you don't understand. They'll laugh. They'll say I'm wasting their time. They'll say a janitor can't compete with students who've had years of training." Maya pushed her chair back, standing with sudden force. Her small frame seemed to swell with conviction. "Let them laugh. They laughed already, didn't they? But you still solved what he couldn't. You're smarter than them, Daddy. I know you are." Her voice trembled, but her gaze never wavered. Jameson looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in days, he saw something beyond humiliation. He saw belief, pure unfiltered belief in him, a belief he had long since stopped carrying for himself. "Maya," he whispered, his throat tight. She crossed her arms, stubborn. "If you don't sign up, I will. I'll tell everyone my daddy is the smartest man I know, and I won't stop until they listen." The ultimatum struck him like a thunderclap. His daughter was 12, but her conviction felt unshakable, her will stronger than his own. She wasn't just fighting for him, she was fighting for the dignity the world had stolen from their family. Jameson closed his eyes, his heart heavy. He wanted to protect her from disappointment, from the cruelty of a world that would mock her father no matter what he did. But how could he deny her faith? How could he teach her to give up when she believed so fiercely in his worth? He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "It's not that simple, Maya." "It is," she insisted. "You just have to say yes." A silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of choice. Jameson glanced at the stack of notebooks on the counter, then back at his daughter. He saw in her eyes, not just hope, but defiance, a refusal to let the world erase him. He swallowed hard. "What if I fail?" Maya stepped closer, her voice steady. "You already won when you solved it. Failing is letting them keep you quiet." Her words cut through him, leaving him trembling. For the first time, Jameson allowed himself to imagine it, standing in front of a crowd, chalk in hand, not as a janitor cleaning up after others, but as a mathematician, proving his worth. The image terrified him, but it also lit something inside him that hadn't burned in years. Maya smiled softly, sensing the shift. "Please, Daddy, do it for you. Do it for us." Jameson looked at her, his chest aching with a mixture of fear and pride. His daughter believed he could fight a battle he had already lost in his own mind. And maybe, just maybe, she was right. The next day, as he passed the bulletin board again, his steps slowed, his eyes lingered on the flyer. The words "open to all" seemed to glow, daring him. His hand trembled as he reached out, tearing off one of the registration tabs at the bottom. He stuffed it into his pocket, his heart pounding. At home that evening, Maya's eyes widened when he placed the slip of paper on the table. "Daddy," she whispered, hope flooding her voice. "Does this mean—" Jameson nodded slowly. "It means I'll try." Maya threw her arms around him, hugging tightly. "You're going to show them. You'll see." But as Jameson held her, doubt gnawed at him. He knew the truth. The world wouldn't welcome him into this competition. And yet, as he looked into his daughter's eyes, he realized it didn't matter. For her, he had to try. Maya begged her father to enter a math competition advertised on campus bulletin boards. Open to all but unwelcome to him. The morning Jameson decided to enter the competition, the campus felt colder, sharper, as if the walls themselves knew what he was about to do. He carried the registration slip in his pocket like a dangerous secret, fingers brushing against the folded paper every few steps. It had taken him 2 days after tearing the tab from the flyer to gather the courage. 2 days of late-night pacing in the kitchen, while Maya pushed him with quiet persistence. 2 days of doubt whispering louder than his daughter's faith. But now, as he walked into the administration office where entries were submitted, he felt every eye on him. The secretary behind the desk glanced up, surprise flickering across her face when she saw who had approached. "Can I help you, Mr. Carter?" she asked politely, though her tone carried the faintest hesitation. Jameson cleared his throat, placing the slip on the counter. His voice was steady, though his palms were damp. "I'd like to register for the mathematics challenge." The secretary blinked. For a moment she simply stared at him, as if waiting for him to reveal that it was a joke. When the silence stretched too long, Jameson's stomach tightened. "Sir," she began carefully, "this competition is open to all registered participants." "That's what it says," Jameson replied, forcing his voice to hold. "Open to all." She hesitated, then took the slip, her pen hovering. "Of course, if you'd like to enter, you'll need to provide a contact number and a signature." Jameson scribbled both with shaky determination. When she slid the confirmation sheet back to him, her smile was strained. "Good luck, Mr. Carter." But as Jameson turned to leave, he heard her mutter under her breath, low, almost swallowed by the sound of rustling papers. "This is going to be something." By noon it wasn't just something. It was everything. Word spread faster than wildfire. A janitor had entered the mathematics challenge. By the time Jameson pushed his mop bucket through the math building later that afternoon, the whispers were unavoidable. "You hear who signed up? Carter? The janitor? Man, that's embarrassing. Guess he thinks cleaning numbers is like cleaning floors." The laughter stung, each chuckle echoing like nails dragged across glass. Jameson tried to focus on his work, his mop sliding across tiles with mechanical rhythm, but he couldn't shut out the voices. It wasn't just students either. A pair of professors passed him in the hallway, speaking in tones they didn't bother to lower. "It's absurd. He'll make a fool of himself. Or worse, make a fool of us." Jameson's shoulders hunched, but he kept pushing the bucket forward. Later, when he entered lecture hall B to tidy up, Lawson was already there, standing at the chalkboard as if waiting. "I heard the news," Lawson said without turning. His tone was smooth, dangerous. "You entered the competition." Jameson set the mop bucket down slowly. "It's open to everyone." Lawson finally turned, his eyes narrowing. "Open to all, yes, but not meant for everyone." Jameson met his gaze, something stirring in his chest. The rules said anyone could enter. Lawson's lips curved into a smirk. "Rules are one thing. Reality is another. Do you know what people are saying, Carter? They're laughing at you. And when you step onto that stage, you won't just embarrass yourself. You'll remind everyone exactly why men like you don't belong there in the first place." The words landed like blows, but Jameson held his ground. He thought of Maya's face, her stubborn faith, the way she had said, "Failing is letting them keep you quiet." "I'm not doing this for them," Jameson said softly. "I'm doing it for me." For the first time, Lawson's smirk faltered. His eyes narrowed, as if he hadn't expected defiance. But then he chuckled, shaking his head. "You'll regret this, Carter. I guarantee it." The competition day arrived, sooner than Jameson expected. The auditorium was filled with students, faculty, and community members, the energy buzzing with anticipation. Contestants sat at long tables on stage, each with paper, pencils, and a small chalkboard propped beside them. Jameson's hands trembled as he adjusted his chair. Around him, the other competitors, mostly graduate students, whispered among themselves, their glances toward him laced with condescension. One leaned over to another and muttered just loud enough, "Does he even know what a derivative is?" Another snickered. "Maybe he'll clean the chalkboard for us after." Jameson ignored them, focusing instead on the sight of Maya, in the audience, her small frame perched on the edge of her seat. She gave him a thumbs up, her eyes shining with unshakable pride. That was enough. The dean stepped to the podium, his voice booming. "Welcome to this year's Briarwood Mathematics Challenge. Today we'll test not just knowledge, but creativity and problem solving. All participants will be given the same problems. Accuracy, method, and clarity will determine your advancement. As the first problem was projected onto the large screen, the room hushed. Jameson's heart raced. His eyes scanned the equation, and for a brief, terrifying moment, the symbols blurred. Doubt screamed in his mind. You don't belong here. They're right. But then something shifted. The numbers fell into place, the pattern revealing itself like an old song returning to memory. His pencil moved across the paper with certainty, each stroke steady, confident. Around him, students furrowed their brows, whispering to themselves, erasing mistakes, scribbling furiously. But Jameson's movements were calm, measured. He wasn't racing. He was understanding. Within minutes, his solution was complete. He glanced up, and for a moment he caught Lawson's eyes in the audience. The professor's expression was unreadable, but there was a tightness in his jaw, a flicker of unease. Jameson raised his hand, signaling he was finished. A hush spread through the room. The proctor collected his paper, scanning it briefly before handing it to the panel of judges at the front. They huddled together, reviewing his work. One judge's brow arched. Another leaned closer, pointing at a line with quiet surprise. Whispers rippled across the auditorium. Students craned their necks, murmuring. Finally, the head judge stood, microphone in hand. The first submission we received is correct. Gasps erupted. Heads swiveled toward Jameson. Some laughed nervously, others frowned, disbelief etched on their faces. But in the front row, Maya leapt to her feet, clapping wildly. Her voice rang out above the murmurs. That's my dad. Jameson's throat tightened. He forced himself to remain calm, but inside his chest burned with a mixture of relief and defiance. He had done it. He had crossed the line they drew, and survived. But Lawson wasn't finished. As the judges prepared to present the next problem, Jameson caught the professor's expression in the crowd. The smirk was gone, replaced by something colder, not disbelief, determination. Richard Lawson leaned toward another faculty member and whispered, his eyes never leaving Jameson. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The competition board announced the first problem set, and Jameson's answer stunned even Lawson. Jameson Carter's correct solution in the first round should have been a triumph. For a moment, it was. The auditorium buzzed with stunned disbelief. Maya's voice rang like a battle cry from the front row, and the judges, after double-checking his work twice, were forced to acknowledge it publicly. But success at Briarwood University didn't carry him forward. It carried him into fire. By the next morning, the whispers had taken root. Did you hear? The janitor actually passed the first round. Yeah, but come on. He had to have seen that problem somewhere before. No way he figured it out himself. You think they're just letting him through for optics? Every corner of campus became a stage for speculation. In classrooms, students leaned over their laptops, scrolling through forums where threads about Jameson swelled with comments. Some joked, some sneered, some defended him. His name, once invisible, was suddenly everywhere, but not for reasons he could control. To many white students, his presence in the competition was an insult. They muttered about lowering standards, about sympathy points, about affirmative action gone wrong. The same people who had never once spoken his name now used it freely, dripping with disdain. Others, especially black students and students of color, saw something different. They saw possibility. They whispered with awe about the janitor who had cracked problems their professors struggled with. They shared screenshots of his solution and wrote messages like, if he can do it, why not us? And in the center of it all, Jameson himself walked through campus with his mop bucket, the murmurs swirling like storm clouds around him. For every stare of admiration, there were 3 more of suspicion. The second round of the competition only fueled the fire. The problem projected onto the screen was brutal. An advanced proof that left half the competitors scratching their heads within minutes. Jameson stared at it, calm at first, then slowly let the rhythm of numbers guide him. His hands moved across the paper, steady, deliberate. While others erased frantically, he simply wrote. When the judges announced once again that his solution was flawless, the auditorium erupted, not in applause but in divided voices. Some cheered, others booed. One student shouted from the back, "There's no way he's doing this himself." The tension was palpable. Even the judges exchanged uneasy glances, aware that the room wasn't just debating math anymore. Afterward, As Jameson gathered his papers, a group of students blocked his path near the exit. "Hey, Carter," one of them sneered. A tall boy with a briarwood hoodie. "What's your trick? You got the answers beforehand." Jameson kept his eyes forward. "No trick, just work." The boy laughed, turning to his friends. "Did you hear that? Just work. Guy cleans toilets all day and thinks he's outsmarting us. Give me a break." Jameson tightened his grip on his papers, but said nothing. He knew nothing he said would change their minds. But the encounter followed him out of the hall, gnawing at him. For them, his brilliance wasn't brilliance. It was a threat. Meanwhile, Lawson watched all of it unfold with a careful eye. He never raised his voice against Jameson in public. He didn't need to. His silence, his faint smirk at faculty meetings, his offhand comments to colleagues carried enough weight. "This whole situation is spiraling," one professor murmured in the lounge. Lawson replied smoothly, "Exactly. And when it collapses, you'll see why some people should never step beyond their station." He spoke the words like fact, not opinion, and the more he repeated them, the more others believed. Jameson, however, tried to shield Maya from the growing storm. At home, he kept his tone light, asking about her homework, cooking simple dinners, pretending not to notice the exhaustion etched on his face. But Maya saw it anyway. She saw the way his shoulders sagged when he checked his phone, the way his eyes clouded when he glanced at the news feeds buzzing with his name. One evening, she slid one of his notebooks across the table. "Don't stop," she whispered. "They're scared because you're winning." Jameson looked at her, tears threatening his eyes. "Baby girl, winning feels like losing sometimes." Still, he kept showing up to the rounds. Not for himself anymore, but for the promise he'd made to her. By the third round, the campus was buzzing like a hive. Students crowded into the auditorium not to learn, but to witness spectacle. When Jameson sat down at his table, he felt the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing down on him. Some gleamed with hope, most with doubt. The problem was projected, and once again Jameson's mind fell into rhythm. Numbers became melody. Logic became song. He moved methodically, carefully, refusing to let the noise around him touch the sanctuary of his thoughts. Minutes later, he set his pencil down. His answer, again, was correct. The judges hesitated this time. They whispered among themselves longer than usual, their brows furrowed. When they finally announced that Jameson had advanced, the auditorium fractured, half erupted in applause, led by Maya's small but defiant voice. The other half hissed with suspicion, muttering about fraud, about impossibility. Lawson watched it all from the shadows of the back row, his jaw set. This wasn't just about math anymore. This was about control. A janitor defying the hierarchy of Briarwood was a threat not only to Lawson's pride, but to the very image of who deserved to belong in those halls. After the round, Jameson overheard a conversation that chilled him. Two white students leaned against a locker. As he passed, not realizing he was close enough to hear, "If he wins, it's going to look bad for all of us. Don't worry. They'll find something. They always do." The words struck Jameson harder than any insult yet. They'll find something, not if he's guilty, not if he makes a mistake. Just the certainty that the system would bend until it broke him. That night, as he walked to his car, he noticed something taped to his windshield. A piece of paper with bold, angry letters. "You don't belong here." His chest tightened. He crumpled the note, tossing it aside. But the message lingered. The campus was no longer divided quietly. The storm was breaking open. By the time Jameson reached home, the online chatter had shifted from whispers to accusations. Social media feeds overflowed with memes mocking him, comments debating him, hashtags questioning him. Janitor math trended, with half mocking his attempts and the other half defending his right to compete. Maya showed him one post that made her fists clench. Funny how he always gets the right answer. Maybe someone's feeding it to him. Or maybe he's just copying. Jameson set his phone down, his hands shaking. "They don't even look at the work," he muttered. "They don't see the hours, the years, just me." Maya reached for his hand. "Then show them again. Don't stop. Please." But Jameson's eyes were clouded with something darker now. He knew storms didn't just pass. They destroyed. The following morning, the twist came. A post appeared on the university's anonymous online forum, one used by students for gossip and confessions. It was short, sharp, and damning. "Jameson Carter is a fraud. His solutions match material from a rare math text word for word. Look it up before you call him a genius." The thread exploded instantly. Within an hour, Screenshots of supposed proof circulated, side-by-side images of equations from an obscure European textbook, and Jameson's solutions. The resemblance was undeniable to the untrained eye. The comments swelled with venom. Knew it. Cheater. Should have guessed. He couldn't have done it himself. The whispers had become thunder. And Jameson Carter, sitting alone in the janitor's closet, with his mop leaning against the wall, stared at the screen in disbelief, as the world turned against him. The post accusing Jameson of plagiarism didn't stay in the shadows of the university's anonymous forum for long. Within hours it had spilled onto Twitter, Instagram and TikTok, gaining traction faster than any of the mathematics problems he had solved. Janitor math. Mop and chalk. Fraud or genius. The hashtags spread like wildfire, attaching themselves to videos, memes, and threads. His face, captured from the grainy clip of him walking between security officers weeks earlier, was pasted onto doctored images. Jameson holding a mop in one hand and a stolen textbook in the other. Jameson's face superimposed on Einstein's body. Jameson sweeping numbers off a chalkboard as if they were dirt. It didn't matter that he hadn't plagiarized. The accusation had become entertainment. Students laughed, retweeted, shared. Some professors even joined the chatter with thinly veiled commentary, posting quotes about academic integrity alongside winking emojis. To the world outside Briarwood, Jameson Carter was no longer just a janitor or a competitor. He was a spectacle. But for every mocking post, there were others defending him. Black students posted threads about systemic bias, about the centuries of brilliance erased by prejudice. Even if he solved it, one user wrote, "They'll never admit it. They'd rather believe a janitor cheated than a black man beat them." Those posts drew fire too. Replies poured in. "Stop making it about race. Merit is merit. If he cheated, he cheated. Funny how you scream racism whenever you lose." Jameson sat in the break room one evening, phone in hand, scrolling through the storm. His throat tightened with every new post. He saw himself turned into a meme, into a joke, into a battlefield for arguments that had little to do with math and everything to do with who the world believed had the right to be brilliant. Maya sat beside him, her own phone clutched in her hands. "Daddy, look," she said, showing him a TikTok where a young black student spoke passionately to the camera. Jameson Carter isn't just a janitor. He's proof that brilliance can exist anywhere. They're afraid of him because he destroys the box they put us in. Her eyes shone with hope. "See? People believe in you." Jameson forced a smile, but his chest felt heavy. "Baby girl, it doesn't matter how many believe. The ones in charge. The ones who decide they don't." The next morning, his fears proved true. He arrived on campus to find flyers plastered on bulletin boards, bathroom stalls, and classroom doors. They weren't official, but their message was clear. Carter the cheat. Keep Briarwood standards. Some had his face photocopied and taped beneath the words. Jameson tore one down, his hands trembling, but there were too many. They were everywhere. He could feel eyes following him as he walked down the corridor, whispers trailing behind like smoke. Later that day, while he was mopping near the student lounge, a group of undergraduates made no effort to lower their voices. "He's pathetic. Entering just for attention. Bet the judges are too scared to disqualify him because of the race card." Exactly. They don't want the headlines, but everyone knows the truth. Jameson kept his eyes on the floor, but his grip on the mop handle tightened until his knuckles turned white. When he reached the locker room that evening, he found something waiting in his cubby. A note, scrawled in black marker. "Go back to cleaning. Stop pretending." For a moment, Jameson just stared at the words. He'd grown used to being invisible, but now visibility was worse. Now, the world saw him only as an imposter who had dared step beyond his assigned role. Still, he pressed on. The semi-final round of the competition drew the largest crowd yet. Students packed the auditorium, phones held high, ready to capture whatever humiliation or triumph unfolded. The problem projected was brutally complex, a series of layered equations designed to test endurance as much as intellect. Jameson steadied his breathing. He blocked out the murmurs, the laughter, the clicking of phone cameras. He let the rhythm of the numbers wash over him. Slowly, line by line, he began to construct his solution. Around him, competitors scribbled furiously. Some bit their lips, others shook their heads in frustration. But Jameson remained calm, methodical, precise. When he finally raised his hand, silence fell. The proctor collected his paper and carried it to the judges. They examined it carefully, whispering among themselves. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the head judge leaned into the microphone. Carter's solution is correct. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Some erupted in applause. Others jeered. One voice shouted from the back, "Cheater." Another, "Fraud." Jameson's chest tightened, but he kept his gaze fixed forward. He refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. When the session ended, he exited through the side door, but the mob followed anyway. Students crowded the hallway, phones raised, taunts sharp. "Hey Carter, show us your textbook. Did Lawson write the answers for you? You don't belong here, man. You never will." Jameson pushed through, his shoulders tense, his throat burning. He reached the stairwell and leaned against the wall, his breath shallow. And then, unexpectedly, a hand touched his arm. He looked up to see a young black student, a freshman, her eyes wide with admiration. "Mr. Carter, don't stop, please. You're the reason I even came to this school. You're proving them wrong." Jameson swallowed hard, nodding silently. He wanted to speak, to thank her, but the words wouldn't come. He realized in that moment that no matter how much they tore him down, his presence meant something to others. But for Lawson, it meant something else entirely. That night, Lawson sat in his office, scrolling through the firestorm online. His lips curved into a thin smile as he read the anonymous accusations, spreading like gospel. Every meme, every mocking comment was fuel, but he knew it wasn't enough. Rumors were one thing. To bury Jameson completely, he needed something official, something institutional. So he drafted an email to the dean. "In light of the serious accusations circulating regarding Mr. Carter's conduct in the mathematics challenge, I strongly recommend an internal review before he is permitted to advance further. This matter concerns not just competition integrity, but the reputation of our institution." He hit send, his chest swelling with satisfaction. The following morning, the announcement came. Students gathered around bulletin boards, refreshing their phones for updates. At 10 a.m., the dean stepped into the main atrium, his voice amplified by a microphone. "Due to recent concerns regarding the integrity of the mathematics challenge, the university has decided to convene a special review panel. Mr. Jameson Carter's eligibility to compete in the finals will be placed on hold until this review is complete." Gasps filled the atrium. Some cheered. Others groaned. Phones shot into the air to capture the moment. Jameson stood at the edge of the crowd, his heart pounding, his vision blurring. The words echoed in his ears. Eligibility on hold. The finals, the chance to prove himself once and for all, had been yanked away, not by failure, but by suspicion. He turned to leave, his legs heavy, but as he did, a voice rose above the noise. "Maya, why are you doing this to him?" she shouted, her small figure standing defiantly in the crowd. "He didn't cheat. He's smarter than all of you put together." The crowd fell silent for a moment, all eyes swiveling to the young girl. Jameson froze, his heart breaking. His daughter had entered the storm for him, and for the first time, he wondered if she would pay the price for believing in him. The dean announced a special review panel before Jameson could compete in the finals. The email came less than 24 hours after the dean's announcement. Jameson was summoned to the administrative building for a formal review of his eligibility. The language was sterile, polite, but the weight of it pressed on him like a verdict before trial. That morning, he stood outside the oak-paneled boardroom, where the meeting was to be held. His janitor's uniform, navy blue patched in places, felt like a costume mocking him. He had considered wearing something else, but what could he wear that would make them see him differently? A suit wouldn't erase the years of being invisible. A tie wouldn't cover the stains of humiliation. He had only himself, and that was already the problem. When the door opened, the secretary gestured him inside. The room was long and polished, with a gleaming mahogany table stretching across its center. Around it sat 6 professors, all white, all older, their glasses perched at the ends of their noses, their files open before them. At the head of the table sat Dean Whitaker, his expression carefully neutral, as though this were just another item on a long list of administrative tasks. Jameson took the lone chair at the end of the table, the distance between him and them deliberate. The imbalance was clear. They were judges, and he was the accused. Dean Whitaker cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. As you know, concerns have been raised regarding your participation in the mathematics challenge. This panel has convened to review those concerns before determining whether you will proceed to the finals." Jameson nodded slowly, his hands folded in his lap. I understand. One professor leaned forward, his voice sharp. Mr. Carter, could you tell us about your formal education? What degrees do you hold? Jameson hesitated. He had expected the question, but it still stung. I completed 2 years at a state college. My studies ended when my father passed. I've continued learning independently ever since. A murmur rippled around the table, skepticism heavy in the air. Another professor raised an eyebrow. So you're self-taught, and yet you claim to solve problems that challenge doctoral candidates? I don't claim, Jameson said quietly. I've shown my work. The words hung in the air, but they didn't pierce the wall of doubt surrounding him. Another professor flipped through his file. There are allegations that your solutions match those found in advanced textbooks. How do you explain that? Jameson leaned forward, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. Mathematics builds on itself. There are only so many ways to reach the truth. If my solutions resemble those in books, it is because the truth is the same, but my steps are my own. The professor's lips pressed into a thin line, unsatisfied. Lawson, seated at the far end, finally spoke. His tone was calm, but his words were barbed. Mr. Carter, I've been teaching mathematics for over 2 decades. I know the time, effort, and resources required to reach the level of understanding these problems demand. Forgive me if I find it difficult to believe that a janitor, with no formal training, has achieved this on his own. The word janitor landed like a slap. Lawson could have said man or competitor, but he chose janitor, sharpening the distinction like a blade. Jameson swallowed hard, meeting his eyes. With respect, sir, whether I sweep floors or stand at a podium doesn't change what the chalk says. The room went still. For a moment, Lawson's expression faltered, but he quickly recovered, smirking faintly. Another professor interjected. Mr. Carter, integrity is the foundation of academia. If you cannot prove the originality of your work, then Jameson cut in, his voice firm but not raised. My proof is in the notebooks I've filled over 20 years. Page after page of problems, attempts, failures, solutions. They're not copied, they're lived. If you'd read them, you'd see the journey, not theft work. Silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. The professors exchanged glances, but their skepticism didn't soften. Dean Whitaker adjusted his glasses. We will review the allegations and make a decision. But I must remind you, Mr. Carter, this competition represents the reputation of Briarwood University. We cannot risk impropriety. Jameson's chest tightened. Reputation. That was the real concern. Not truth. Not fairness. Reputation. The university's image outweighed his humanity. Tell me something, Jameson said softly, his voice trembling with restrained pain. If I had walked in here as a white doctoral student, would we be having this conversation? The question froze the room. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Others avoided his gaze. Only Lawson held his stare, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, as if daring him to keep speaking. Jameson leaned back, exhaling slowly. He had said it, the truth. Whether they admitted it or not, they knew. The dean cleared his throat again, breaking the silence. We will now deliberate. Mr. Carter, please wait outside while we consider the matter. Jameson rose, his knees weak, and walked out into the hallway. He sat on a wooden bench, hands clasped, staring at the floor as muffled voices rose and fell behind the door. Every second felt like an eternity. He thought of Maya, waiting at home, believing he would return with news of victory. He thought of the notebooks stacked in their living room, the proof of his life's work dismissed as fantasy. He thought of how quickly brilliance turned to burden when carried in the wrong skin, in the wrong hands. Inside, the professors debated. We can't let him advance. It undermines the integrity of the competition. But his answers are correct. That can't be denied. Correct or not, the perception is damaging. If he wins, what does that say about us? Finally, Dean Whitaker called for a vote. Jameson heard chairs scrape, voices murmur, the faint shuffle of papers. His chest tightened. He braced himself for the inevitable. But then, the door creaked open. Jameson looked up, expecting the secretary to call him back in. Instead, a new figure entered the room. A voice firm, female, unshaken, cut through the deliberation. This meeting is not valid without hearing from me. The panel turned, startled. Jameson's eyes widened. Standing in the doorway was Sarah Whitfield, a graduate math student. one of Lawson's own protégés. She carried a stack of papers in her arms, and determination in her eyes. The room, already tense, shifted into shock, and for the first time, Jameson felt the smallest flicker of hope. Just as the vote was about to disqualify him, a surprise ally walked in. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Sarah Whitfield, and the air inside the boardroom shifted instantly. Her sudden appearance broke the cadence of authority in the room. The calm certainty of 6 professors ready to deliver a verdict against a man they didn't believe in. Lawson's eyes narrowed as soon as he saw her. "Sarah," he said, his voice smooth but laced with steel. "This is a closed meeting." Sarah stood taller, though her hands trembled against the papers she carried. "Then open it, because you can't discuss Jameson Carter's credibility without hearing mine." The professors exchanged uneasy glances. Some leaned back, irritated at the interruption. Others intrigued. Dean Whitaker cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Miss Whitfield, this panel is convened to address Mr. Carter's eligibility, unless you have information directly relevant to these proceedings." "I do," Sarah cut in, her voice cracking slightly, but her resolve holding. She looked around the table, her chest rising and falling. "I've worked with Mr. Carter, quietly, off the record, and I need to tell you the truth before you destroy his name." A stunned silence blanketed the room. Jameson, still seated at the end of the table, blinked in disbelief. His eyes locked on Sarah. He barely knew her. They had spoken in passing, when she stayed late in lecture halls, notebooks spread wide, struggling through problems. He had offered small hints, nothing more. He never imagined she'd carry those moments into this room. Sarah stepped forward, laying her papers on the table. "I'm a graduate mathematics student, as you know. I've studied under Dr. Lawson. I've published. I've spent years working through advanced theory. And yet," she paused, her voice trembling but clear, "there were times when I hit walls, concepts I couldn't untangle, proofs that made no sense to me." Her eyes flicked toward Jameson, then back to the panel. Jameson Carter solved them, effortlessly. The words landed like a crack of thunder. Lawson's jaw tightened. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Choose your words carefully." But she pressed on. "He solved problems I couldn't. Problems my peers couldn't. Problems even you, Dr. Lawson, struggled with. He explained them in ways that made the math come alive. I started seeking his guidance, not because he was pretending to be brilliant, but because he was, and because no one else cared enough to help me understand." The professors shifted, some visibly shocked, others skeptical. One leaned forward. "Are you saying this janitor has been tutoring you?" Sarah nodded firmly. "Yes. Secretly, because I knew how it would look. I knew people would say I was making it up. But the truth is, Jameson Carter isn't just capable. He's extraordinary. He doesn't need to cheat. He doesn't need to steal. He is remarkable." Her voice cracked on the last word, but her eyes burned with conviction. Jameson sat frozen, his throat tight. He wanted to thank her, to tell her she didn't have to put herself on the line for him, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was watch as someone else finally said what he'd carried in silence for decades. Lawson's composure cracked. His hand slammed against the table with a sharp bang, making Sarah flinch. His calm mask shattered into fury. "This is absurd," he barked. "Miss Whitfield, you are jeopardizing your credibility and your future by aligning yourself with a man who has no business in this field. Do you have any idea what you're saying?" Sarah's chin lifted. "I know exactly what I'm saying, and I know what I've seen. Jameson Carter is a mathematician, whether you want to admit it or not." Lawson leaned forward, his eyes cold, his words dripping with venom. "You think you're helping him. You're not. You're proving my point. He has manipulated you into believing his lies, because you're too inexperienced to see through them. You've been used." Sarah shook her head fiercely. "No. I came to him, and I'll come again because he's the best mind I've worked with." Dean Whitaker raised a hand, trying to calm the storm. "Miss Whitfield, these are strong claims. Do you have any evidence to support them?" Sarah spread out the papers she carried. "These are my notes, problems Jameson helped me solve. You'll see my handwriting, my errors, and then his corrections. Step by step. He didn't copy. He didn't cheat. He taught." The professors leaned in reluctantly, scanning the pages. One furrowed his brow. Another muttered, "The logic is sound." For a fleeting moment, Jameson saw doubt flicker, not against him but against the wall Lawson had built around him. For the first time, Truth cracked through. But Lawson wasn't finished. He rose to his feet, towering over the table, his voice booming. This is nothing more than sympathy masquerading as evidence. A student's word against academic integrity. Do you all not see what's happening here? If you let this man advance, you're not protecting the reputation of Briarwood. You're destroying it. He reached into his leather briefcase with deliberate calm, pulling out a slim binder. He laid it on the table and slid it forward. I anticipated this, he said smoothly, regaining his composure, because I knew Carter would try to manipulate sympathy. But I have proof, undeniable proof, that he has stolen his work from sources far beyond this campus. He flipped the binder open, revealing photocopied pages from rare mathematical texts, side by side with Jameson's solutions. The resemblance at first glance was striking. Gasps circled the table. Even Sarah faltered, her face paling. Lawson leaned in, his voice low and final. These are not coincidences. They are theft. Line for line, symbol for symbol. This man is not a genius. He is a plagiarist. And if you allow him to continue, you disgrace every one of us who has earned our place here. The room fell silent. The professors stared at the binder, some nodding grimly, others hesitating but unwilling to challenge the weight of Lawson's certainty. Jameson felt the floor tilt beneath him. He wanted to shout, to explain, to tell them that resemblance wasn't theft, that truth always echoed itself through different minds. But the binder sat there like a weapon, its false power undeniable. Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide, silently pleading for him not to give up. But Lawson's words filled the room, suffocating. This is the end of this charade. And with that, he slammed the binder shut. Lawson slammed his hand on the table, declaring he had proof Jameson stole theories. The binder sat on the boardroom table like a loaded weapon. Every page Lawson turned was another bullet fired at Jameson's credibility. Each photocopied equation aligned beside Jameson's solutions with surgical precision. The professors leaned in, their murmurs growing louder, their skepticism hardening into condemnation. On the surface, the resemblance looked damning. Line for line, one professor muttered. Identical notation, another observed. This is very troubling, said a third, his voice heavy with disapproval. Jameson sat stiff in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. He looked at the pages meant to erase his life's work, and felt a fire rising in his chest. He knew what Lawson had done. He knew this wasn't coincidence, but manipulation. Those are my solutions, Jameson said, his voice low but trembling with conviction. Not copied, not stolen, mine. Lawson smiled faintly, savoring the moment. And yet, Mr. Carter, they appear word for word in publications dating back over a decade. Rare texts, barely accessible outside of academic circles. Tell me, how would a janitor in your position have acquired them? The word janitor cut like a blade again, deliberate and cruel. Jameson swallowed, forcing steadiness into his voice. Because mathematics doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to rare books, locked away in your offices. Truth is truth. If I arrived at the same answers, it's because my mind took me there. Lawson chuckled, leaning back in his chair. A convenient defense, genius by coincidence. Discovery without context. Do you realize how insulting that sounds to those of us who've labored for decades? Jameson's jaw clenched. He wanted to shout that he had labored for decades, just not in the halls they deemed worthy. His labor had been done in silence, in the margins of notebooks written after 12-hour shifts, in chalk scrawled on boards that would be erased before dawn. Sarah broke the tension, her voice sharp with anger. This isn't evidence, it's manipulation. You cherry-picked examples and ignored the rest of his work. I've seen Jameson solve problems in real time. He doesn't need to copy. He thinks. He creates. But her defense only deepened the professor's unease. To them she was young, impressionable, perhaps compromised. Lawson knew it too. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Miss Whitfield, loyalty is admirable, but misplaced loyalty is dangerous. You are sacrificing your reputation for a man who deceived you. Sarah's face flushed, but she didn't falter. I'd rather sacrifice my reputation for truth than protect yours built on lies. The room went still. Lawson's smile thinned, his hand tapping the table in irritation. Dean Whitaker interjected, his voice cautious. Mr. Carter, Miss Whitfield, these are serious accusations on both sides. We need clarity. Mr. Lawson, Could you leave the binder with us for further review? Lawson slid the binder forward, his expression triumphant. Of course, but I assure you, you'll find everything you need in those pages. The professors flipped through again, shaking their heads. Their skepticism was no longer hidden. What had begun as doubt was now leaning toward condemnation. Jameson felt the weight of betrayal heavier than he ever had before. It wasn't just Lawson. It wasn't just the binder. It was the centuries of bias folded into the fabric of the room. Bias that told them it was easier to believe in his guilt than in his brilliance. His voice broke the silence. Do you even hear yourselves? You're so ready to believe I stole this because it fits the story you already wrote about me. The janitor. The black man who doesn't belong. You don't want to believe I could solve these because then you'd have to admit the problem isn't me. It's the cage you've built around what brilliance is supposed to look like. His words hung in the air, raw and undeniable. But the faces around the table didn't soften. Some looked away. Some hardened further. Only Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Dean Whitaker sighed. Mr. Carter, this panel must act in the best interest of the university. Allegations of plagiarism cannot be taken lightly, unless compelling evidence arises to prove otherwise. I fear we may have no choice but to disqualify you. Jameson's chest tightened, his breath shallow. He felt the walls closing in, the inevitability of erasure pressing down on him. He had walked into this room carrying the weight of every whispered insult, every mocking laugh, every stereotype, hoping truth would finally break through. But truth, he realized, wasn't enough. Not here. Sarah slammed her fist against the table. This isn't justice. This is execution. The professors frowned, their discomfort growing, but no one challenged the dean's words. Lawson leaned back, his smirk returning. It's not personal, Carter. It's reality. You tried to play a game you weren't meant for, and now the game is over. The betrayal cut deeper than Jameson could bear. Not just from Lawson, but from the institution itself. He saw it now, clearer than ever. This wasn't just about math, this was about who was allowed to matter. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. You can take the competition from me. You can call me a fraud, but you can't erase the work I've done. You can't erase who I am. Lawson chuckled softly. History will erase you just fine. The words landed like a blade twisting in the gut. Jameson sat back, his shoulders heavy, his spirit bending under the weight of betrayal. He thought of Maya, her wide eyes, her unwavering faith. How could he tell her that the world had silenced him again? How could he tell her that brilliance wasn't enough? Dean Whitaker cleared his throat, preparing to call the vote. Unless new evidence is presented, the panel must move forward, all in favor of disqualification. The door burst open. The sound startled everyone. Papers fluttered, chairs scraped, heads whipped toward the doorway. And there, small but fierce, stood Maya Carter. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her cheeks flushed from running, but her eyes blazed with determination. In her arms she carried something heavy, stacked notebooks, their covers worn, their pages spilling loose sheets from years of use. She staggered forward under their weight, but refused to stop. With each step, the silence in the room deepened. "Wait!" she cried, her voice trembling but loud enough to pierce the air. "You can't decide without seeing this." Jameson's heart stopped. His daughter, his 12-year-old daughter, had walked into the fire. The professors stared, stunned. Lawson's face tightened, the smugness draining into something colder. Fear. Maya slammed the notebooks onto the table. They hit with a heavy thud, chalk-stained pages spilling open to reveal years of equations, half-finished proofs, scribbled notes. "These are my daddy's," she declared, her small voice shaking with fury. "He's been working on them for years. He didn't steal anything. He wrote all this, alone, every night after work. You don't know him, but I do." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "He's not a cheat. He's a genius, and you're not going to take that from him." The room froze. Jameson sat in stunned silence, his eyes wet, his chest aching with pride and fear. He had tried to protect her from this world, but now she stood before it, fearless. The professors shifted, uncertain. Some leaned forward, curiosity breaking through their skepticism. Sarah's eyes widened with relief, and Lawson's face darkened with rage. Maya burst into the meeting, holding Jameson's original notebooks. The boardroom fell silent after Maya's declaration. Her small hands pressed against the notebooks, as though she could anchor her father's truth to the table itself. The professors leaned forward, drawn not only by the sight of the tattered journals, but by the raw fire in the child's voice. Jameson sat frozen, pride and terror warring in his chest. He wanted to pull her into his arms, shield her from the weight of this battle, but it was too late. She had stepped into the storm herself. Dean Whitaker cleared his throat, visibly shaken. "Miss Carter, this is highly irregular. She's not lying." Sarah cut in, her voice steady. "I've seen these notebooks. I've worked with Jameson. What's inside proves his work is original." The professors exchanged uncertain glances. Lawson's face darkened, his fingers drumming sharply against the table. "This is emotional theater," he snapped. "Not evidence. A child's word and a few scribbled journals don't outweigh documented proof of plagiarism." Maya's chin lifted, her eyes blazing. "Then read them. If you're so sure he cheated, read them. You'll see." Her defiance stunned the room. Even the professors, accustomed to silence from children in their presence, hesitated. Finally, Whitaker sighed. "Very well, the notebooks will be reviewed, but the competition finals are scheduled in 2 days. Unless authenticity can be established before then, Mr. Carter cannot proceed. Time." That was the verdict. 2 days to prove a lifetime of work. The next 48 hours became a blur of frantic urgency. Sarah and Maya worked side by side, hauling the notebooks into the library, spreading them across long oak tables under fluorescent lights. Page after page revealed the arc of Jameson's mind. Messy attempts, corrected formulas, breakthroughs scrawled in the margins, dated years before the textbooks. Lawson claimed he'd copied. His handwriting shifted across time, from youthful loops to steadier lines hardened by age. It was a living map of persistence. Maya pointed out details eagerly. "Look, this one's from when I was in kindergarten. He wrote the date right here. He's been solving things for years." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the equations. "This isn't theft. This is evolution. You can see how he learns, how he builds. No plagiarist leaves behind mistakes and corrections like this." Jameson stood back, silent, his heart aching as he watched them fight for him. His daughter too young to carry such weight, and Sarah, risking her own future to stand by his side. Every hallway outside seemed charged with whispers. Students leaned against lockers, scrolling on their phones, dissecting every rumor. Some mocked, "Now he's dragging his kid into it." Others softened, "If those notebooks are real, maybe we were wrong." The campus had split into 2 camps, those who wanted him destroyed, and those who dared to believe. But Lawson was relentless. In the faculty lounge, he cornered Whitaker and 2 other professors. His tone was smooth, but his words were knives. "You're letting sentiment cloud judgment. A child storms in with her father's notebooks and suddenly decades of standards mean nothing? If you allow this, you open the door for chaos. Anyone with scribbled journals could claim brilliance." Whitaker frowned. "Still, if the dates prove originality." Lawson cut him off sharply. "Dates can be forged, pages fabricated. Do you want Briarwood to become the laughingstock of academia over a janitor's stunt?" The professors shifted uncomfortably, the fear of institutional embarrassment heavy in the air. Lawson knew exactly where to press. Pride, reputation, control. Meanwhile, Sarah worked tirelessly, scanning pages, cross-referencing them with published texts. Her laptop glowed late into the night, as she muttered to herself, "If I can show his solutions predate these publications, they can't deny it." Maya sat beside her, sorting through stacks. "Here, look, this page is from 2012. He signed it, and he even wrote the weather that day." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's brilliant. Personal notes, details, things no plagiarist would bother recording." Jameson, standing nearby, shook his head slowly. "I shouldn't have let it come to this. I never wanted you both fighting my battles." Maya looked up, her voice fierce. "They made it your battle, Daddy. And if you don't fight, they win." The words struck him like a blow. Out of the mouths of children came truths he had spent years hiding from. The hours bled away. By the second evening, Sarah had compiled a preliminary report. Dozens of pages showing Jameson's notebooks contained unique work, often dated years before the textbooks Lawson had weaponized against him. She printed it, bound it, and placed it on the dean's desk with trembling hands. "This," she said, her voice steady, "is evidence." Whitaker leaned back, scanning the pages, his brow furrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. "It is compelling." Lawson, standing in the corner, scoffed. Compelling? This is desperation disguised as scholarship. You'll risk this institution's credibility on the word of a student and a child? Sarah bristled. No. On the truth. Something you seem determined to bury. The dean raised a hand. Enough. The panel will review tonight. A decision will be made tomorrow morning. The weight of those words settled over Jameson like stone. Tomorrow morning, less than 24 hours before the finals. His fate balanced on a vote, not on truth. That night, Jameson sat alone in Lecture Hall B, staring at the chalkboard. The room was dark, except for the faint light from the corridor. His notebooks were spread across the first row of desks, waiting to be judged by men who had already decided who he was. He gripped a piece of chalk, pressing it to the board. His hand trembled. Why do I keep doing this? He whispered into the empty air. Because numbers had always been his refuge. Because even when the world dismissed him, the board never lied. He began to write, slow at first, then faster. Equations sprawled across the black surface, each line a cry against erasure, each symbol proof that his mind mattered. By the time he stopped, his hands were covered in white dust, his chest heaving, and still the silence gave him no answers. The next morning, Maya found him there, asleep at a desk, chalk dust streaked across his uniform. She shook him gently. Daddy, come home. You need to rest before tomorrow. He opened his eyes, exhaustion etched deep. I don't know if there'll be a tomorrow for me in this. She frowned, fierce. Yes, there will, because I won't let them take you away from me like that. Her words filled the empty room with light, but outside those walls, darkness stirred. On the eve of the finals, Jameson returned to the building one last time to collect his things. The hallways were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that hummed with something unsaid. When he pushed open the door to Lecture Hall B, his breath caught in his throat. The board where he had poured his soul the night before, was defaced. Scrawled in red paint, dripping like blood, were words that cut deeper than any accusation. Malpee boy. Fraud. Stay in your place. And beneath it, written larger, uglier, impossible to ignore, in R. Jameson staggered backward, his chest heaving, his hands trembling. For a moment, he thought he might collapse. The slur screamed louder than any lecture, louder than any judge's ruling. It wasn't just about math anymore. It was about erasure, violence written in red across his sanctuary. And as Jameson stared at the board, a sickening realization gripped him. Someone hadn't just tried to destroy his reputation. They wanted to destroy him. On the eve of the finals, someone vandalized the classroom with slurs, targeting Jameson by name. The auditorium was unlike anything Jameson had ever stepped into. Rows upon rows of seats were filled, not just with students and professors, but with reporters, alumni, and community members drawn by the firestorm his name had created. Cameras clicked, red recording lights glowed, and whispers rippled like waves through the crowd. At the center of it all, Jameson Carter stood alone. The stage lights washed over him, harsh and unforgiving. His janitor's uniform, freshly laundered but still faded with age, contrasted against the sleek suits and polished gowns of those in the audience. To them, he was a curiosity, a scandal, an anomaly. But to Jameson, this was something else entirely. This was the reckoning. Maya sat in the front row beside Sarah, her small hands clenched tight around the edge of her seat. Her eyes never left her father. She had fought too hard, carried too much to see him falter now. Dean Whitaker's voice boomed across the hall. Welcome to the final round of the Briarwood Mathematics Challenge. Tonight's problem has been selected by Dr. Richard Lawson. A murmur rippled through the audience at Lawson's name. Some smiled knowingly. Others frowned, sensing the conflict beneath the ceremony. Lawson himself stepped forward, his presence commanding. He adjusted his tie, his lips curving into a smile that was polite enough for cameras, but sharp enough for Jameson to see the blade beneath it. This final problem, Lawson announced, is designed to test the very limits of mathematical creativity and understanding. It is not for the faint of heart, but it will reveal, without question, who truly belongs on this stage. Jameson met his gaze. He understood the subtext. This wasn't just a problem, it was a trap, crafted by a man who wanted to see him broken in front of the world. The giant screen behind them flickered, then stabilized, revealing a dense web of symbols, proofs nested within proofs, layers upon layers of abstraction. The audience gasped. Even seasoned graduate students in the crowd furrowed their brows, whispering among themselves. Jameson felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just difficult, it was engineered cruelty. The proctor placed a piece of chalk on the table beside him. Jameson reached for it, his hand trembling slightly as he closed his fingers around the slender stick. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the projector. He stepped toward the massive chalkboard, the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing against his back. For a moment he froze. This isn't just math, he told himself. This is survival. His mind reached for the rhythms he had relied on all his life, the quiet music of numbers that had always given him refuge. Slowly, deliberately, he wrote the first line, then another. His strokes were careful, his breathing shallow but steady. The crowd leaned forward, watching as symbols took shape on the board. His process was clear, logical, building piece by piece towards something coherent. Maya's lips moved silently in the audience. You can do this, Daddy. Sarah sat rigid, her eyes darting between the board and Lawson, who stood at the side with arms crossed, expression unreadable. Minutes passed. Jameson's solutions stretched across the board, his confidence growing with each step. The rhythm returned, the melody of logic weaving through his mind. For a brief moment, he felt free again. Just a man and a problem, nothing else. But then halfway through, he stopped. The chalk hovered midair, his hand trembled. His eyes darted across the symbols he had already written, realization dawning. Something was wrong. The problem wasn't a test of skill. It was a snare. Jameson traced the equations backward, his pulse quickening. There it was, an embedded contradiction, buried deep within the problem itself, a deliberate flaw, designed to lead him in circles, to collapse any attempt at a solution. Gasps rippled through the audience as they noticed his pause. Whispers rose like wind. Did he get stuck? Finally, knew it was too good to be true. Look, he's frozen. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She leaned forward, desperate, whispering to herself, "Don't stop. Please don't stop." Jameson's grip tightened on the chalk, his breath shallow. He wasn't stuck because he didn't know. He was stuck because he did know. Because Lawson hadn't given him a problem to solve, but a poison to choke on. Lawson's lips curved into a faint, satisfied smile. He stepped forward slightly, his voice cutting across the room with feigned concern. "Is something wrong, Mr. Carter? Do you need clarification?" The audience chuckled softly at the condescension in his tone. Jameson turned his head, his eyes locking on Lawson. His voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp. "You didn't give them a problem. You gave them a trap." A hush fell over the auditorium. The judges shifted in their seats, uneasy. Lawson's smirk widened. "Then by all means," Lawson replied smoothly. "Show us how a janitor escapes it." Jameson turned back to the board, the chalk trembling in his hand. His chest burned with humiliation, anger, and fear. But beneath it all, another feeling rose, defiant. He wasn't solving for the judges. He wasn't solving for Lawson. He was solving for Maya, for the child who had carried his notebooks into battle. He was solving for every night spent erasing equations on borrowed chalkboards, for every whisper that told him he didn't belong. The contradiction on the board wasn't his failure. It was Lawson's weapon, and somehow, he had to disarm it. The silence deepened. Every second felt like an hour. The crowd leaned closer, waiting for collapse. Jameson closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. When he opened them, the board no longer looked like a wall. It looked like a puzzle, twisted and cruel, but still one he could face. He lowered the chalk to the board, his hand steadying, and began to write again. But inside, his mind screamed with one truth. Lawson's trap was worse than he had imagined. Halfway through, Jameson paused, hand trembling, not because he didn't know, but because Lawson's trap was worse than expected. The auditorium hung on the edge of silence, the kind that crackled with anticipation. Jameson Carter stood before the chalkboard, chalk trembling between his fingers. The trap Lawson had laid glared back at him, a snarl hidden in the equations. To solve it straight through was impossible. Lawson had designed it that way. But Jameson wasn't there to play Lawson's game. He stepped back from the board, studying the twisted maze. Then slowly, deliberately, he wiped the last half clean. The audience gasped. "What is he doing?" A student whispered. "He erased it." Another hissed. "Is he giving up?" Lawson smirked from the side of the stage, arms crossed. To him, this was proof enough. "See? he muttered under his breath. He can't do it. But Jameson wasn't quitting. He was rewriting. He placed the chalk back on the board, and instead of continuing Lawson's path, began from the beginning. His movements were slower now, precise, almost surgical. He reframed the question not as it was given, but as it should have been. Line by line, he exposed the contradiction embedded within the original problem. His voice, quiet but steady, carried through the hushed auditorium. You see, he said, this problem isn't a problem at all. It's a trick. If you follow it as written, you'll circle forever. But mathematics doesn't circle, it expands. The error here, he underlined Lawson's sabotage with a sharp stroke of chalk, isn't mine. It was planted. Gasps rippled through the room. Heads turned toward Lawson, whose smirk faltered. Jameson pressed on, flipping the trap on its head. But if you strip away the false path, the truth emerges. He began to build again, writing a new framework beside Lawson's broken one. Each line he drew was deliberate, clean, an act of defiance against the prejudice woven into the sabotage. Where Lawson had hidden walls, Jameson revealed doors. Where Lawson had twisted logic, Jameson untangled it into clarity. Students leaned forward, whispering in awe. He's not just solving it, he's proving the problem was wrong. He's rewriting the whole thing. Maya clutched Sarah's hand in the front row, tears brimming in her eyes. That's my daddy, she whispered, voice breaking. The chalk flew across the board, dust clouding his hands, white smudges streaking his uniform. Jameson's chest heaved, but his focus never wavered. This wasn't about showing brilliance. It was about showing truth, and truth was the one thing they couldn't erase. When he reached the final line, he circled it firmly. And this, he declared, turning toward the audience, is the real solution. Not the one you were meant to follow, but the one that reveals what was hidden. The auditorium erupted. Students jumped to their feet, clapping, shouting. Some pounded their hands against the seats. For the first time, Jameson didn't just see disbelief in their faces. He saw awe. Sarah rose, her voice loud and clear. He didn't just solve it, he proved the trap. He exposed it. Maya leapt to her feet beside her, her small voice piercing through the chaos. He's smarter than all of you. The judges huddled together, flipping through notes, whispering urgently. Their eyes kept darting between the chalkboard and Jameson. Finally, the head judge stood, microphone trembling in his hand. In all my years overseeing this competition, I have never witnessed anything like this. Not only has Mr. Carter solved the problem, he has revealed a deliberate flaw in its construction. His proof is extraordinary. The crowd roared. Phones shot into the air, flashes illuminating the hall. Hashtags were already forming, tweets already flying. Jameson Carter wasn't just trending, he was rewriting the narrative in real time. But Lawson wasn't finished. He stepped forward, his face pale but his voice sharp. This is a performance, nothing more. Theatrics. Do not be fooled. He didn't solve the problem. He changed it. That's not mathematics. It's manipulation. Booth erupted from the audience, students shouting him down. But Lawson's eyes burned with fury. He slammed his palm on the judge's table, his voice booming. This man is a fraud, and I can prove it. The room fell into stunned silence. Jameson's chest tightened, his hands trembling at his sides. He had thought he'd dismantled the trap, thought he'd finally torn through the web. Lawson spun around him, but Lawson wasn't retreating. He was lunging one last time. What proof? A judge demanded sharply. Lawson reached into his briefcase, pulling out another stack of papers. His voice trembled with fury, but his words rang with conviction. If you want to see who this man really is, if you want the truth behind his so-called genius, then look here. The audience stilled. The celebration cut short. Jameson's breath caught. He knew Lawson wouldn't give up easily. But this was worse than he expected. The audience erupted in cheers. But Lawson wasn't finished. He made one last attempt to destroy Jameson. The papers Lawson slammed onto the judge's table, rattled under the weight of his fury. His voice cracked with desperation, not power. This proves he doesn't belong. He's nothing but a thief wrapped in theatrics. But the crowd no longer hung on his every word. The momentum had shifted, and he could feel it slipping away. The head judge leaned forward, his tone icy. Dr. Lawson, what exactly are you accusing Mr. Carter of now? Lawson stammered. His work, it mirrors sources, obscure publications. He cannot possibly. But the judge cut him off. And yet tonight, before every witness here, Mr. Carter not only solved the problem, but revealed deliberate sabotage in its construction. Sabotage which you, Dr. Lawson, were solely responsible for submitting. A murmur rippled through the audience. Sharper this time, suspicion turning toward Lawson himself. Lawson's face flushed crimson. That's absurd. Sarah stood from the front row, her voice ringing clear. He trapped Jameson on purpose, and tonight, Jameson proved it. Students erupted in applause, stamping their feet, their voices rising louder than Lawson's protestations. For every finger Lawson jabbed toward Jameson, 100 more pointed back at him. Dean Whitaker finally stood, lifting his hands for silence. Enough. His gaze swept across the room, stern and unyielding. What we witnessed tonight cannot be erased. Mr. Carter's proof was original, extraordinary, and undeniable. Dr. Lawson's conduct will be subject to immediate review. The words landed like a gavel strike. Lawson's mouth opened as if to argue, but no sound came. He looked around, realizing for the first time that he was alone. Professors who had once nodded at his every word now avoided his eyes. Students who once revered him now whispered with disgust. The silence that met him was louder than any accusation. His downfall didn't come with shouts. It came with silence. The silence of respect shifting away. The silence of a reputation crumbling. Jameson stood still, his chest heaving, his chalk-dusted hands trembling at his sides. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shouted back, hadn't begged. He had simply written truth, line by line, until even lies couldn't hold. The audience erupted again, not mockery this time, not doubt, but thunderous applause. Maya leapt to her feet, tears streaming down her face, shouting with pride, "That's my dad." Jameson closed his eyes, a tear escaping down his cheek. For years he had been invisible, erased, dismissed, and now, for the first time, he was seen. The next day, the campus buzzed with headlines. Social media overflowed with clips of Jameson dismantling the trap, hashtags shifting from mockery to reverence. Janitor math transformed into Carter-proof. Editorials called it a historic moment at Briarwood. Some compared him to overlooked geniuses of the past, while others admitted the university owed him more than applause. And in the dean's office, the conversation turned official. "Mr. Carter," Dean Whitaker said, his voice solemn but warmer than Jameson had ever heard it, "the board has voted unanimously. We would like to offer you a position as an adjunct professor of mathematics at Briarwood." Jameson froze, words catching in his throat. For so long he had fought simply to be allowed in the room. Now they were handing him the chalk as his own. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, steadying himself. "Thank you. But I need you to understand, this isn't just about me. It's about every student who was told they don't belong. About every mind erased before it was given a chance to shine." Whitaker nodded gravely. "And we hope with you here, that can begin to change."
News spread quickly. Some celebrated, others bristled, but Jameson didn't focus on them. He focused on Maya, who hugged him so tightly that night he thought his heart might burst.
"You did it, Daddy," she whispered. "You showed them." He smiled softly, pressing his forehead to hers. "No, baby girl. We did it." Sarah visited too, her eyes filled with relief and pride. "You changed everything last night," she told him. Jameson shook his head. "I didn't change the world, Sarah. I just refused to let it change me." Weeks later, Jameson stood again, in Lecture Hall B. This time it wasn't to mop floors or erase equations in secret. It was to teach. The classroom was quiet, filled with students waiting, curious, some skeptical, some eager, some nervous. He picked up the chalk, feeling its familiar weight in his hand. "Mathematics," he began, his voice steady but warm, "isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about refusing to stop at the walls people place in front of you. Numbers don't lie, but people do. People will tell you who you're allowed to be. Mathematics will remind you who you already are." The students leaned in, scribbling notes, their eyes fixed on him. For Jameson, this wasn't about vindication anymore. It was about transformation, turning pain into proof, invisibility into visibility, silence into voice. And yet, late at night, when the classrooms emptied, he still found himself alone at the chalkboard, the way it had always been. The room was quiet. The board was blank. The chalk was cool against his fingertips. This was where it had begun. An empty room. A janitor daring to touch a board no one thought belonged to him. Now he returned not as a trespasser but as its master. He began to write again, slow and careful. Equations sprawled across the surface, each symbol carrying the weight of his journey. He solved not for recognition, not for applause, but for the love of the language that had saved him. Behind him, the door creaked. Maya stepped in, watching quietly, as her father wrote. When he finally paused, she walked closer, her voice soft but heavy with thought. "Daddy," she whispered, "why did they only see you when you proved them wrong?" Jameson froze, the chalk slipping slightly in his hand. He turned at her, his chest aching. Her words pierced deeper than any insult. Because they were true. He looked at the equations on the board, then back at his daughter. His voice was low, filled with both sorrow and hope. "That's the question, Maya. The one we'll keep asking until the world has no answer left." The board loomed behind him, filled with proof. The classroom was silent, heavy with reflection, and as Jameson picked up the eraser and began to wipe the board clean, the sound of chalk disappearing echoed into eternity, leaving the haunting question behind. As Jameson erased the board, Maya asked the haunting question that echoed into the screen. Why did they only see you when you proved them wrong? Stories like this don't just happen on screens. They happen every day, unseen, unheard, and unchallenged. If you believe voices like Marcus's deserve to be heard, type yes in the comments. And if this broke your heart, subscribe, because silence only protects injustice.